Hi, and welcome to Viewpoints, a public project inspired by conversations held during the Rural Talks to Rural 2020 conference. The purpose of the program is to engage and promote a variety of perspectives on contemporary and global issues through a rural lens. Each session will run between 1 hour and 1 hour and 30 minutes and will be recorded in front of a live audience. The material will then be edited for the CCRC podcast with highlights from the session posted on Instagram. Tonight, we explore fashion and its impact on the planet, our one and only home. The episode is entitled, "Every Snowflake in an Avalanche Pleads Not Guilty." The fashion industry accounts for about 10% of global carbon emissions and nearly 20% of wastewater. Fashion requires more energy than both aviation and shipping combined, and is the second largest polluter on the planet. The Nigerian writer Ben Okri wrote, "Change your story, and you might very well change your life." If we can collectively change our story, how might that change positively impact life on our planet? The producer-moderator for tonight's program is Yuda Maharaj. The creative team that helped put it together includes Yuda, Lois Anderson, Harveen Sandhu, Bill Dow, Al Lazan, LJ Prabhaharan, and Pete Smith.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the very first Viewpoints podcast episode. I'm happy to have everyone here today. So my name is Yuda. I go by she, her pronouns, and I am the host for today's exciting conversation on fashion and the environment. So besides being host, I am a registered social service worker by credentials, as well as a social and environmental activist, or as I like to say, advocate, which is a combination of both activist and advocate. I'm also really dedicated and passionate about bringing awareness and amplifying social justice issues and fighting for a more sustainable future, and in this case, a more sustainable fashion future for both people on the planet. And so I'm currently also a project consultant at the Community Climate Council, which is a youth-founded, volunteer-led, nonpartisan environmental nonprofit organization in the region of Peel, which is in Ontario, Canada, or what is currently known as Canada, and also a Remake ambassador. And Remake is a global nonprofit organization dedicated, focused on turning fashion to a force for good. So, Viewpoints is a radio podcast in part by CCRC, which offers unique perspectives on contemporary and global issues. Each session brings people together from different worlds to offer their stories, their experiences, their questions, and their gathered insights on a specific topic. So in today's conversation, we will be focusing on fashion and its industry and its social and environmental impacts. So I will be speaking with two amazing individuals who are passionate and educated on the many different elements that make up fashion and its industry, and who will also be speaking on their experiences and their knowledge and viewpoints on the impacts that fashion has on both people and the planet, and its correlation and causation to the climate crisis. And so I also want to mention that throughout our conversation today, please feel free to write down your comments and your thoughts and questions in the chat box below. So before we do begin, I do want to take this time to respect and acknowledge the traditional and ancestral land that I currently occupy and live on as a settler. In particular, I want to acknowledge the privilege of residing in the hamlets of Inglewood, within the town of Caledon, which is in Ontario, Canada, or what is currently known as Canada, which is situated on the ancestral lands of the Petun and the Haudenosaunee peoples. Petun are Iroquois-speaking people, closely related to the Huron-Wendat. The name Petun comes from the French which they are known for picking tobacco or cultivating tobacco. And in French, pitchoun is closely translated to tobacco, but they themselves like to refer to themselves as Tionantari. The Haudenosaunee, or the Iroquois peoples, which means people who build a house or people of the Long House, are members of a confederacy of indigenous nations known as the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. And that consists of Seneca, Koyaga, Anera, Onondaga, Mohawk, and Tuscarora, becoming known as the Six Nations. So as a settler on stolen land, I grew up not recognizing the importance of learning Indigenous history and the colonization and mass genocide they have experienced in what is currently known as Canada. And it wasn't until I became aware of the heaviness and the incomprehensible injustices of the Indigenous communities during my social service worker program, which is only a couple years ago at Seneca College. And the Seneca peoples also happen to be an Indigenous nation, a part of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. So the more I educated myself, the more curious I became on Canadian history, in specific, how our government is supporting and upholding Indigenous reconciliation, to which was followed by disappointment. So I also learned that the colonized history of Indigenous communities is not just a thing of the past. However, it is very much prevalent and alive today, and social injustices occur every single day in these remote nations of Indigenous communities. So it's important to me and to many others to continue to not only restore justice, but to continually work and learn how to uphold Indigenous reconciliation, or Indigenous sovereignty, as well as learning how to move past truth and reconciliation and rather actively decolonize our systems, and learning what it means to decolonize our systems and how that looks like. But also learning how to decolonize our work and our connections with our land and nature and the stewards of the land who came before us. So it's not simply, in my opinion, not enough to passively acknowledge the land that we are on, but to learn and unlearn on how to become better for our land and its people. So I know we may not know or understand the extent of Indigenous history and the importance of reconciliation and decolonization, but that is why it is a learning process, and I'm new to this too, and I'm always learning, and it's a journey of us connecting with our land and its inhabitants. And so, in my opinion, the first step in doing so is to learn what land you are on, and learn about the meanings and the history and the culture of Indigenous nations. So if you would like that, to know what land you are on, I will actually put two links in the chat. You can visit nativeland.ca. I'll just put it right here for everyone. If you can access that, that'd be great. Native-land.ca or whose.land/en for English / or just simply research on your own accordance, because I think it's also really important to find factually based information that's also repeatable. So please also, whenever you are able to, please feel free to put down where you are coming from in the comment down below. And yeah, so without further ado, I will also be introducing you to our guests for today, which I'm very sure that you're all excited to hear from and learn about and later on learn about their personal and educational experiences and understandings of the implications and consequences of fashion on our environment, and how that continues to perpetuate the climate crisis, but also learn about their personal tips and advice and thoughts on how to become better consumers to our planet and to our people. So I would love to give the floor to both Anthea and Malika, who will be introducing themselves. So please, Anthea, whenever you're ready, introduce yourselves to our audience listeners.
Hi, thank you so much, Yuda. What a beautiful and fulsome acknowledgement of the territories you come from. Thank you for that. I'm coming to you all from North Vancouver on the west coast of Canada, and I live and work on the territories, the existing territories of the Tsleil-Waututh, the Squamish, and the Musqueam peoples who shared these these areas, the area that I'm upon, and reaped its many, many riches. I'm surrounded by berries almost the whole year, and very grateful to be here and grateful to have the opportunity to give this acknowledgement, because I think it's a new thing for us all and it's a good step forward. So I'm Anthea Mallinson. I'm a dyer, a textile artist, and a teacher working in costuming in the film industry in Vancouver, Canada. I have been teaching textile art since 1988, and I am a founding instructor in Capilano University's 20-year-old Costuming for Stage and Screen program in North Vancouver. I've been working as a key dyer and textile artist in the film industry since 1997, and I'm founder of the Dye Department, a textile arts collective working in film. That's my intro. Malika, over to you.
Thank you so much, Anthea and Yuda. So, hi guys, I'm Malika, and I'm a sustainable fashion blogger and Fashion Takes Action Youth Ambassador. So my work involves a lot on styling and looking at waste consumption. And on my blog, I mostly focus on educating my followers about anything about sustainable fashion and bringing light on whatever is happening in the sustainable fashion space and bringing awareness to them. So that was my little introduction.
Amazing. Thank you both for introducing yourselves to our audience and listeners. Don't worry, you're going to hear a lot more from them later on, and I cannot wait to get into it. But before I do, though, I thought it would be great for myself to talk about my own understandings and connection and viewpoints on fast fashion. Also, I think it's really important for me to be transparent in the fact that I am in no way an expert in this topic, and I believe we're always learning and unlearning, as I previously mentioned, and wherever you are in your journey is where you are meant to be. It is a very nuanced topic, and there's a lot of things out there, but the purpose of this conversation is not to guilt trip anyone nor intimidate anyone, rather to make this a learning experience for us all, because I'm going to be learning a lot from both Anthea, Malika, and vice versa. And so I want to create this safe space for all of us to speak on this topic that may be overwhelming, but also perhaps completely new. So I do want to actually start off with a question. It could be rhetorical, or please feel free to write it in the chat box. But I wanted to know if any of you did you know that the fashion industry is the second largest polluting industry in the world, second to that of the gas and oil industry? I don't know about you, but I find that completely alarming and mind blown, because it goes to show you how much of an impact the fashion industry has on our world. And you wouldn't think that it does, because, you know, when we think about fashion, we just think about, you know, going to a shop and putting it on and call it a day. But there's so much that goes into it, and it puts things into perspective and how serious it is on our environments. And the fact that it is the second largest polluter, it makes me very angry and disappointed, but also betrayed, because it also shows you that these businesses and corporations and companies can get away with it, and I'm not okay with that. So I just wanted to put that out there as a beginning conversation. So also, I was thinking about this, and I usually, when it comes to this topic, I don't really use stats or numbers, and it's because I tend to I guess better comprehend or retain information just by experiences or just hearing people's stories. But I think maybe perhaps if people were to hear these statistics and numbers, it can actually resonate with them, or they're able to better comprehend it. And so what I'm going to do actually is state just a few facts, because it might put things into perspective for you all. So according to Business Insider, fashion production comprises of 10% of total global carbon emissions. So I'm not good at math, and it's not my strong suit, but I think that's a lot. That's worrisome. It also exhausts our water resources and pollutes our rivers and streams, with 85% of all textiles going into dumps each year, which is just disappointing. It's wild to me. And lastly, as majority of our fast fashion clothing is made of synthetic fibers, such as nylons and polyester, which if those of you who know, it's made of plastic materials. When these clothing are washed, it releases about 50,000 tons of microfibers in our ocean each year, which ultimately impacts our sea life, our coral reefs, and the entirety of our ecosystem. And for me, this fact really did, I guess it was really impactful for me, because it made me realize that fashion is not something, or the impacts of fashion is not something that's just tangible or tactile or visible to the eye. Rather, it goes so much more deep than that. And that's something that we should definitely talk about and make the forefront of our conversations. So there's far more fact-based information out there that we can go over, but I think that will literally take us the entire day. So I won't go more into that. And I'm sure our panelists will be speaking on a little bit about this later on. So in terms of just my connection with fashion, why do I care about this topic? Why is it important to me? So fashion has always been something that I enjoyed and I embraced as a younger child. I use it as a form of self-expression and creativity, and a way to express my identity as a woman. And I also actually view fashion as genderless, which can be something kind of new to people, but that's what I love about fashion. It's just about how you relate to it. And so as a teen, I never thought anything of my clothing being more than just a fashion or trendy item. And that is until I became more interested in social justice issues and the work that people were doing to advocate on behalf of marginalized communities. And I personally felt that connected with my values and aligned with it. And so I started learning more about the value of my own clothing and the problematic issues of corporations and businesses I was supporting, and that didn't sit right with me. So through all of that journey, or throughout that time in my life, I became involved with the environmental movement. And so I'm constantly speaking and advocating for climate justice for both people on the planet. And fashion just happens to be something that I'm very, I guess, dedicated to and really passionate about. So I think what's also helped me feel more closely and aligned with fashion and its impacts is the idea that the things that we support do not only impact ourselves, but the life around us. And in this particular case, supporting the fast fashion industry means demanding more clothing due to trends, which means putting pressure on the supply chain, which means pressuring garment workers to work faster and quicker, and thus producing these cheaply made clothing to get to companies quicker, which means allowing factory workers to work in horrible conditions and living on extremely low wages, which means allowing them to, allowing the factories actually and corporations to get away with the unjust treatment of workers. So it's really this cycle and this chain that just goes on and on and on, and we don't realize the impact of our actions. And so the cheaply made clothing that they make or that they produce don't last long, as we know, and due to our throwaway and single-use culture, people get rid of their clothing by either throwing it away, which please don't throw away your clothing, or they recycle clothing, which, by the way, if you didn't know, clothing is not recyclable. That's another conversation as a whole, but because it is, majority of them is plastic. Plastic cannot be recycled more than once or twice. Something about the lifespan is just you can only recycle something twice. So yeah, clothing is not recyclable for the most part. And so what happens is that it ends up in our landfills. And even if it's donated, it's also most likely will end up in landfills, because only 10% of clothing is actually donated, which is also staggering. And so if the clothing is in the landfills and it sits there for a long period of time, what it does, it creates greenhouse gas emissions. And with that, it creates extreme air pollution. And let's say our clothing ends up in our oceans or in our water systems. It ends up creating water pollution, but also endangering our sea life. And I guess I won't go too much into it, but essentially when it comes to clothing and it being in our water systems or in our oceans, clothing takes years to biodegrade. And because the clothing is made of plastics, the water or the clothing will essentially turn into microplastics. And so these little small microplastics are consumed by these little fishes. And then the bigger fishes eat the smaller fishes, and then the even bigger fishes eat the fishes. And so essentially when these fishes or sea life consume these microplastics, and then we end up consuming these sea creatures or sea life like fishes, we consume the plastics then. And then now suddenly our health is declining, and we're getting or is declining due to these illnesses and diseases. So I know it's a very overwhelming fact or thing to think about, but that's how I think about it. And it's really scary and disappointing. And so it's this constant and vicious cycle that needs to be stopped. So suddenly my thrifting obsession, because I love thrifting, I don't know if I mentioned that, I love thrifting, but my thrifting obsession went from passively shopping to consciously and critically being aware of my impacts and how my actions have reactions. And then one thing led to another, and I became more passionate and compassionate about advocating for the rights of garment workers who make our clothing and don't make a decent living wage, and much more. And then I became a bit more strict with standing ground in what I choose to support and put my money to, which meant always researching as much as I can the values and sustainability and ethics of a store's supply chain when I do shop. Or in this case, simply reducing my shopping habits or my shopping consumption and reframing my shopping habits and consuming less in general, or just using what I already have and upcycling and being creative with that. So this journey that I'm on right now, it's definitely not an easy one, and it's one that presents its challenges. But when you value the lives of others and the planet that you are on, it kind of essentially becomes instinctual and habitual to use your voice, to use your money, and ultimately your privilege to do good for the good of others. So that's exactly or kind of where I am right now on my journey with fashion, and how I've kind of reframed and been more critical with my actions. But I think I've done a lot of talking for now. I am very excited to kind of lend the floor to Malika and Anthea to speak on their perspectives and experiences with fashion. So please, I will let Anthea have the floor. So please, Anthea, share your story with us.
Thank you, Yuda. My goodness. I will first of all give you a little bit of a background on where my knowledge comes from, and then I want to take you all on a little bit of a journey, because I feel that textiles as a whole is such an invisible field. So in Vancouver, on the west coast of Canada, there is no textile production and virtually no garment manufacturing. So my knowledge of textiles, dyes, history, manufacture, and the textile footprint is knowledge that I have accumulated as a maker and as a researcher teacher in response to finding myself working in a relative void of information and being tasked with teaching others, both my students and in film, my crew. Textiles are so much a part of our lives that they are almost invisible, especially when you live in a part of the world where they are not made. So don't feel bad if you've never thought about this before. And yet we are wrapped in them when we are born, we are wrapped in them when we die. They surround us every day, and they are a vehicle of human innovation, invention, science, art, culture, technology, industry, and revolutionary change. The story of textiles is one of extraordinary complexity and impact on human history, our daily lives, and the contemporary human predicament. I want to take you on a brief historical journey, touching on the depth and enormity of this field and ending with questions about the present day. We know now that working with fibers predates the human use of clay. That's how long our relationship with textiles is. To paraphrase Elizabeth Wayland Barber, author of Women's Work, The First 20,000 Years, about 20 to 30,000 years ago, some genius hit upon the principle of twisting handfuls of little weak fibers together into long, strong thread. Now, to quote her, "We don't know how early to date this great discovery, but whenever it happened, it opened the door to an enormous array of new ways to save labor and improve the odds of survival, much as the harnessing of steam did for the Industrial Revolution. Soft, flexible thread of this sort is a necessary prerequisite to making woven cloth. On a far more basic level, string can be used simply to tie things up, to catch, to hold, to carry. From these notions come snares and fish lines, tethers and leashes, carrying nets, handles and packages, not to mention a way of binding objects together to form more complex tools. So powerful, in fact, is simple string in taming the world to human will and ingenuity that I suspect it to be the unseen weapon that allowed the human race to conquer the earth, that enabled us to move out into every eco-niche on the globe during the Upper Paleolithic. We could call it the string revolution. Imagine being able to lash scaffolding together to reach a cave ceiling, having a wick to keep a lantern burning, nets to fish with and to carry things, snares to catch small animals for ease of hunting. This is technology, and this is textiles. Human ingenuity and innovation quickly developed this flexible medium into the foundations of the myriad of uses we see for textiles today. As humans moved around the globe, technical knowledge embedded in fabric structure was exchanged. Knitting, netting, simple weaves, complex weaves, different spinning tools and loom types were invented many places and grew and developed through trade and exchange. Materials innovation also grew. As sheep were bred for fleece, linen was finessed into transparent gauze. Cotton was selected for its whiteness. The secret of silk was smuggled out of China. Cultural, religious, and artistic ideas traveled embedded in imagistic fabrics. It's easier to carry a beautiful brocade ribbon home than a mosaic. The human impulse to embellish, which is the fashion impulse really, nurtured the ingenuity of weavers and also of dyers. The dyers were chemists of their day. Sometimes our 20th century hubris has us imagining, and 21st, for those of you who weren't born until the 21st, has us imagining that the pre-industrial world was drab, but this is not the case. Fabric dyeing was a significant industry and a major international trade at least as early as 1250 BCE, when the Phoenicians were harvesting and selling the famous murex purple. Much earlier than that, color and dye processing was being sought and found by peoples all over the world, hand in hand with textile development. The difficult and complex process of extracting and using plant-based indigo blue was discovered in many places around the world. The insect-based carmine dyes were also identified and used in different parts of the world. Kermes in Europe, the famous cochineal from Central and South America, which was as valuable as gold in the days of England's Queen Elizabeth I. Ecological impact is not new in this textiles world, and the pre-industrial days of textile production were not without it. I have two clear examples for you. One is the Tyrian purple industry, coveted by the Romans and Byzantine empires, drove the Aegean murex sea snail to near extinction and came to an abrupt end after the fall of Constantinople in 1204, Common Era, when no one could muster the financial resources to revive the expensive and failing industry. Failed due to volume, a lesson for us. The European fairy tale of Rumpelstiltskin has been interpreted as a parable, warning of the dangers of the linen industry. This story tells of a woman who boasts to the king that her daughter can spin straw into gold. The king thinks that's great, and if it's true, he'll marry her. And if it isn't true, he'll cut off her head, which seems to be quite a common European formula for princesses. She's locked in a room full of straw, along with a spinning wheel, and expected to perform this magical task. Of course, she cannot, and begins to cry when she is interrupted by an odd-looking little man who says he can make her a deal. The deal is that he will spin the straw into gold, and in return, she will give him her firstborn child. She agrees. This odd little man performs the deed, spins straw into gold for 3 nights in a row. The king is ecstatic and marries the young woman with no delay. Of course, shortly after the birth of their firstborn child, the strange little man comes to collect his due. The young queen begs for a way out of the deal. The little man says that if she can learn his name in 3 days, he will let her keep her child. The story ends happily for her because she does learn, with the help of a lot of people racing all over the place and working quite hard to figure it out, that his name is Rumpelstiltskin. The ecological interpretation of this story is that the straw is flax, which is hard on farmland. The gold is linen, as linen trade brings great wealth. The firstborn child represents the future, embedded in the health of the land, and the name Rumpelstiltskin represents the knowledge of how to grow and process flax without doing ecological damage. Textile production continued, nourishing local and international economies and trade, spurring on technological change, being part of the common and everyday, as well as the decorative, prestigious, and extraordinary. Fast forward to the Industrial Revolution and the transition from hand production methods to machines. Textiles were the dominant industry of the Industrial Revolution. Every stage of production was examined and eventually mechanized. The spinning jenny was an early key development in the 1760s. The time needed for spinning was slowing the looms down. The invention of this multi-spindle spinning frame was an early example of mechanization. It is immortalized in the poem Fragments by William Butler Yeats. Locke sank into a swoon. The garden died. God took the spinning jenny out of his side. I cannot help but hear this as an ecological dismay in response to the Industrial Revolution. In the early 1800s, the jacquard loom was invented. This loom uses a punch guard system to create very complex weaves and is considered to be the grandparent of the computer. Another very big cause and effect in this realm of textiles, this field of textiles. Synthetic dyes began to be produced in the late 1700s, but the real change occurred in 1856, when the young Englishman William Perkins stumbled on the first of the aniline dyes, and it was the color mauve. You might remember the beauty and the coveted wishes of the people who wanted purple back in Phoenician times, and that love of purple carried forward. And this first aniline dye was this brilliant, brilliant purple called mauve. His discovery had far-reaching consequences. It was the first true multi-step synthesis of an organic compound and was quickly followed by many more. By the end of the 19th century, dyers had around 2,000 synthetic colors in their repertoire, and the chemical dye industry had effectively replaced the millennia-old enterprise of extracting dyes from natural sources. The dye trade became the forerunner to an organic chemical enterprise that would eventually produce antibiotics, explosives, perfumes, paints, inks, pesticides, and plastics. The textiles field is huge and has been a great innovator and a great disruptor. Now, my very quick overview has almost reached the present day, where we cannot imagine not having any color we want and almost any fabric. Ecological awareness started to become a topic of conversation in the 1960s and 70s. I don't know the history of safety regulations in the workplace. While there are still issues huge in this respect today, the conversation did start earlier than the mid-20th century. When I cite the 60s and 70s, I'm referring to the growing conversation around the harm to the planet. Dye manufacturers were in pace with human safety, and were taking steps to remove dyes that had been proven carcinogenic. But the public conversation about the impact on the planet, the impact of textiles on the planet, was almost non-existent. Maybe the public conversation about the impact of anything on the planet was almost non-existent. There were tragedies unfolding, such as the loss of the Aral Sea, which began shrinking in the 1960s. The Eastern Basin is now called the Aral-Kum Desert. But there wasn't yet a public awareness of the link to textiles through the high water demands of massive cotton crops. However, awareness had begun. For instance, local regulations about chemical waste, which did begin in Victorian times, began to increase. At the same time, fast fashion began to grow. Eventually, in the early 2000s, Greenpeace turned its research lens onto the textile field and published a paper which was an immensely helpful resource for me and laid bare the enormity of the industry, of its complexity, of its undeniable global footprint, and of the task of addressing the ecological problems embodied within the field. I want to pause for a second to acknowledge that there is another aspect to the problems of the textile field, and Yuda, you have touched on it already, and that's the whole issue of labor rights, human rights, and labor abuse. That is also a long, deep, and current issue, and a conversation that I don't want to neglect. It's a parallel train, a very much entwined parallel train. I just am not speaking to that at the moment. Back to the complexity of the textile industry. Supply chain complexity is a topic of conversation amongst manufacturers and retailers as a problem to be solved. I want to describe the complexity of the industry in simple terms to help the consumer perceive some of the invisible impacts. Cotton, for instance, is grown in many parts of the world. What are the chemical restrictions on crops in the country where the cotton for your summer shirt come from? Did all the cotton in your shirt come from the same place? Where was it spun? Where was it woven? How many shipping trips did it take around the world before it reached the store you found it in? First the crop is shipped, then the yarn is shipped, then the fabric is shipped. When it was woven, what starches or chemicals were used on the warp to keep the looms moving? Was the loom roll of fabric treated with a fungicide before being shipped to the next stop? Where was it dyed? Does the country it was dyed in have effluent regulations? Where were the dyes manufactured? Once it was dyed, was it shipped again? What kinds of finishing chemicals were used as a final touch? Once it reached a manufacturer, who cut the patterns? Who did the sewing and where? Are there workers' rights where it was sewn? If there are, can you know whether or not this job was subcontracted and the workers' rights did not apply? Even Greenpeace, back in 2000, came out of that first study shaking their heads at the complexity of it all. It was going to be difficult to untangle and difficult to measure. But since then, information abounds. You have to get the skills to comb through it all and determine which pieces are true, which are relevant and useful to you. But those skills are evolving too. So what to do? To me, the biggest problem is sheer volume. For instance, an ecologically conscious denim producer who sources their raw materials carefully and pays their workers well is understandably pleased that one of their projectile looms can weave 30 million meters of denim per year. With 30 million meters of denim, you can wrap the earth about 750 times. Like, it's kind of mind-boggling to think of a statistic like that. However, I do want to emphasize that there is a lot that is encouraging. Local regulations really do make a difference because textiles are a global affair. If a cloth finisher in England finds a forbidden fungicide in the effluent coming from the factory, they will contact the fabric supplier on the other side of the world and demand that that fungicide use be stopped. So, think global and act local is what I try to practice. You are still allowed to love and enjoy your clothing and all the other beautiful textiles in your life. The fashion sphere is being examined and challenged and even reinvented. And for more on that, I will sign off and turn it over to Malika. Thank you.
That was a very wonderful presentation, Anthea. And I will start sharing my screen. Can you guys see it? Just need some yes or no's.
Not yet.
Oh,
Oh, there, yeah.
okay. So hi, and welcome to my presentation, Fashion Climate Crisis. But before I start, let's get personal. So I was born and brought up in India, and when I was 15, I moved to Canada. And the reason I tell you this is because I'm the youngest in my family, and in fashion perspective, I've grown up wearing hand-me-downs. So, for example, I've grown up wearing hand-me-downs. So, also in that sense, I came up with different ways to style it, and so for example, I used to drape a sari over my brother's baggy shirt, or mend my sister's jeans and make them into shorts. So I feel like I've been practicing slow fashion since I didn't even know that this sustainable fashion existed. So this is where I feel I was at. Now, what can you expect from this presentation? How are fashion and climate related? Fashion is an inevitable part of our lives. Shocking facts about consumption, and how can you help make a difference? So I would like to start with a quote first. We are the first generation to understand climate change and last generation to do something about it. So when I came across this quote, it brought a sense of urgency, and it kept motivating me to keep educating myself. Did you know that we have had 12,000 years of stable climate, and now we are in the era where we're creating man-made changes to the nature? Nature is our only home. We can't live anywhere else, and we really are messing it up. So the man-made construct of climate change is also put against the man-made construct of human inequality. And both of the issues are part of fashion. So I would like to ask you this question. Do you wear clothes? You can just say yes or no in the chat. Exactly. So fashion is part of our lives. Each of us wake up every morning and decide what to wear. Or if you're ambitious like me, you probably decide before you go to sleep. So now, from a government and business perspective, it is a huge contribution to our economies around the world. Did you know it's a 3 trillion worth of Did you know that 3 trillion worth of fashion is circulated each year? And fashion industry employs 50 million people around the world. Fashion affects us all. We can make changes to it on a personal level and on a wider industry level. I'll talk more about this in my last slide. So now some facts I would like to share with you. Just give me a second. So when it comes to sustainable fashion, it's not only related to fashion garment or business, but also changing scale of fashion consumption. Clothing production has been doubled since the year of 2000, and yet 40% of clothes that are bought are never been worn. And I found about this the stats, and I was fully blown away that the world now consumes about 80 billion new pieces of clothing every year, and 73% of post-use disposed clothing is eventually incinerated or sent to landfill at the assumed rate of 48 million tons of clothing disposed of every year. That's a terrifying amount, especially compounded over time. And now you must be thinking, How is it my fault that these brands are overproducing clothes, which is easily accessible to us? Fashion industry is also a toxic system that is reliant on humans over consuming. So fast fashion as an industry is a concept that puts speed at its core center. And it's all about trends and making last week fashion old fashioned. Now, I want to help you. So how can you help make a difference? First, I would like to say that remember, progress over perfection. You will not achieve that perfect sustainable lifestyle overnight, and just don't give up yet, because to be honest, even I haven't achieved that perfect sustainable lifestyle, and I'm learning and learning every single day. So just don't give up yet. And these are some of the questions I came up with, which I feel can help you. These are some of the questions that I came up with, which I feel can help you to analyze your own wardrobe. And this is where you can even start today. And you can take a screenshot of it, or whatever you're comfortable with. So can you identify which items you wear the most? How many items per year do you add and remove? What is the most expensive item in your wardrobe? Which item holds the most emotional value and why? Oh, I'll go if you guys want to screenshot this. So you can find me on Instagram, The Fashion Espresso, where fashion is consumed one sip at a time. Thank you so much for attending our presentation.
Okay, wow. Those presentations were amazing. What I really loved is that Anthea provided the kind of like the history of the textile industry and talked about the past and pulled from the past. And then Malika brought the present day and talking about consumerism and sustainable fashion. So I think that's amazing. You both are full of knowledge and wealth, and I absolutely love that. I actually think this would be a great opportunity to, I guess, go to the audience or listeners. If you have any questions, please put them down in the chat over here so we can, or I can look into it, and both Anthea and Malika can answer them. I think there was one question that Peter Smith asked for Malika. So Malika, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you a question. Can you actually briefly talk about what is happening in textiles in India in regards to the making of it?
I'm going to be honest, I'm not really that aware of textiles in India, but I know that since I've grown up, I've always seen people around me talking about how dyes have been very bad and cancerous for us. So in terms of, especially, so in India, we have cows roaming around freely. And what I've seen it through my eyes, and it's painful to watch that they will take their mouths onto the dyes, what is it called, the little thingy, where they will like mix the dyes, and they will drink it without even knowing. They'll think it's water, but it's actually a dye. So, and I've heard like new stuff like that. I'm not really aware of that, but this is just a personal experience that I went through, and it was horrifying to see.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, hearing that, I'm really sensitive to hearing animal like cruelty in any sort, so that's just disappointing, and that's horrible. Let's see if we have any other questions. Okay, so Brian asked a question, and please, Anthea and Malika, if you want to answer, by all means do. He asked, what happens to garment makers when we reduce our consumption? I think that's an interesting question.
I think that's one of the things that keeps me up at night, actually. So there's I from a kind of idealistic, if I could, rule the world point of view, I would want to have the garment makers slow down and get paid more and make things that are a higher quality, and have the consumers persuade themselves to purchase higher end garments less often. But absolutely, what is going to happen to the garment workers as we slow down our consumption is a question that needs to be considered. However, I think that in some ways, like increased mechanization has already in the past thrown us into situations where workers no longer have their jobs. And so we need to look at the past when this has happened before. Like when I talked about the dye synthesization, when they synthesized indigo, there was massive famine in India because all of a sudden the indigo farmers' product wasn't needed. And so this is a problem. And I know that there are real scholars looking at labor inequity around the planet, and specifically at textiles, but also around the whole planet. And I don't have an answer. I'm glad you're asking that kind of question. I don't have an answer.
And honestly, I think these questions are very important and valid. And I think it's okay to not have the answer, because we may not have the answer for a lot of these questions. I think the great thing is these questions can challenge our beliefs and make us think. And I've never really thought about it in that way, which is something that I'm kind of shocked, because I think about the livelihoods of garment workers. But to know if, based on our actions, if we stop consuming less and not demanding as much clothing, what happens to the workers who make these clothing? So that's a great question, and one that I think will also leave me up at night thinking. But maybe we can, I guess, leave this kind of.
Say something. Sorry.
Oh, for sure. No, go ahead.
So I feel what happens to garment work is when we reduce our consumption. I feel even right now, I mean, even when we reduce our consumption, it's gonna get a lot better. That's just my opinion, because right now, even if you see, they're not even making living wage. They're just making minimum wage. I think they make 33 cents or something. So I'm not, just don't quote on me, but I think they make 33 cents. So I feel when we actually start reducing our consumption, there will be a lot of transparency in supply chains and sub-supply chains. So I think it will be better for workers, and not like, I know a lot of people that I talk to, they're like, oh, why should we not shop fast fashion? We're kind of helping the workers to make money. That's totally wrong, because we're not really helping workers. We're just helping those billionaires making more money and money. Those workers are not getting even paid properly. So I feel it's gonna help those workers even more, because the less the consumption, the more people can look at the transparency and help workers, and maybe they can actually start getting paid even more.
Totally agree with you. Yeah, it's definitely it's a very subjective conversation as well to have, because people will challenge it and see other ways. But good point, Malika. Okay, there's a lot of questions in the chat. Let's see. Okay, I kind of like this question. What do you think is the most sustainable? What do you think is the most sustainable cloth or fabric out there? Maybe Anthony, you can answer that. I'm not sure.
The most sustainable new cloth. I think I favor hemp. But it's a really complex, you really have to look at all the complexities of it, because I have heard that hemp is less hard on the land than linen, but all of the bast fibers, that's any fiber that comes from the stem of a plant, nettles, linen, hemp, they need processing. So you have to make sure that the processing, like nowadays when you buy linen, inexpensive linen, it pills on the surface. If you bought Irish linen, it would never, ever, ever peel on the surface. And that's because it's been chopped up and chemically melted more quickly than the old ways of processing linen. So my quick answer is hemp, but you just always need to know that there's complexity to the story.
For me, the most sustainable fashion, the most sustainable cloth is your own wardrobe, or even your mom's wardrobe or your dad's wardrobe. How I know it's not as specific to Anthea, but what in my personal experience, that how I go about it. So right now I'm in India, and I've been doing a lot of tailor, so we have tailors available, like it's very easy available here. So what I do is I go to my mom's wardrobe, and I see if she has any extra cloth. And I feel that's the most sustainable, because that's literally in my house, and I'm finding ways to repurpose it, or like try to make something out of it. So the most sustainable cloth is going to be in your house. Just you have to look for it.
I have to agree, completely. So if you already own some polyester, use it. It's going to last forever.
No, I love that. That's a great great perspective on that question, Malika. Actually, I have a question, and it's kind of like a two-parter question. I will start off with the one that was just presented to us in the chat by Katie. In terms of the current industry right now with fast fashion, and we see a lot of fast fashion brands like H&M and others, but that are trying to establish more sustainable efforts, which in my opinion is not sustainable. But I guess my question, or Katie's question, is, what do you feel will advance sustainability in the fashion industry? So it doesn't have to be, because when we say the word fashion, it can be fast fashion, it can be sustainable fashion, or ethical fashion, which is a different question I can ask as well. But what do you think will advance sustainability in the fashion industry today?
Which one of us? I feel a tiny bit disengaged from fashion. I don't actually buy a lot of clothes, and I'm always thinking of clothing in terms of costumes, so they're part of a story. But I think I think education. I think there's still a lack of awareness of the amazing field of textiles and the enormity and the complexity. So probably just education.
Very true. Sorry, Malika, yeah.
No, go ahead.
No. The floor is yours.
So what do you feel will advance sustainability in the fashion industry? That's a question, right? I feel, I don't have any specific answer to this, but I feel people need to realize that sustainable fashion is not something you can buy into. It's more of a mindset. It's more of a lifestyle you can create. So, and also being sustainable, I feel it opens such creative doors to us. So we have to, like, in point of like cultural context, we have to understand that this is something to also look forward to. So what is something advanced sustainability in fashion industry? We have to start looking sustainable fashion as in more of like how we can be more creative, how can we be more innovative with whatever we already have.
I agree 100%. And I think it also comes down to, like you said, sustainability is a mindset. Sustainability is not something you buy into. It's the idea of having longevity and actually having a relationship with our clothing. That's first and foremost the most important thing, the way I see fashion. And that kind of goes into I guess the two-parter question that I have personally. Do you think that fast fashion can ever be sustainable?
Fast fashion can be sustainable, but not ethical. So two different parts. I'm going to be super transparent. I used to be a fast fashion lover. Literally, I would go to Zara, H&M, And so I feel, and like I still possess those clothes. I'm like, it's not something like when I learned about sustainable fashion, I threw all those clothes. That will be unsustainable of me. So I feel yes, and it's kind of a complex question. So yes, it can be sustainable if you really keep those clothes, if you really take care of them, if you really, read those laundry labels, because we tend to kind of ignore that sometimes, and we just like throw them in our washing machine and dryer, and then we don't kind of think about it because we only think, oh yeah, it's cheap and disposable, I can just go buy next and next. So I feel if we like keep them, love them, as we like just like how we invest into luxury clothes. So I feel like yes, it can be, but ethically, never. There's a long way to go.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think this question is definitely a very complex one, because the great thing about these conversations is that we all have different perspectives. And I remember this question was proposed to me on a conversation I had with somebody else, and I would have to say that fast fashion can never be sustainable. And I'll explain, because fast fashion in the name itself means rapid. It means it's in demand. It's something that's always going. So if fast fashion means immediacy and demand, then no matter what it is, if the clothing is made from sustainable materials and it's made using less energy or water, it comes down to the garment workers. So if who's making them? The garment workers are making these clothing, and they're definitely not being treated properly. They're working in horrible conditions and not getting paid enough. So the reason why I asked is because H&M has come out with this new sustainable line, and and it's great that they're making efforts, but the efforts kind of go unnoticed, or kind of or just isn't as valuable, because it is 100% greenwashing. Because as long as a fast fashion brand is creating the sustainable clothing, or quote unquote sustainable, it is not sustainable. And I agree with you that it is not ethical, because I know you mentioned the ethical component of that, which means that the people who are making it, I understand that. But I think it's really, really, really important to kind of understand the nuance of what that meant. The question fast fashion, or the terminology fast fashion, immediately erases sustainability. And I know, and I think it's such an important thing to talk about, because I see a lot of misconceptions, but we definitely need to reframe what we think about sustainability with fast fashion. Those two words don't go together, in my opinion. But I love that you mentioned that, Malika, because this is all about our learning opportunities. And I agree with you. I thought it could be sustainable, but we're always learning. And so I just wanted to put that out there too. But I'm just reading the comments down here. Yeah.
I agree with you in some parts, and like especially when it comes to H&M, they're always greenwashing us, and it's such an unfortunate part, because people who are in the industry, like sustainable fashion space, they know what these brands are doing, but people who are not, they just buy into it, right? So I feel and also like I've been to Zara, and I've always seen these like little donation boxes, and it's so little, it's so tiny, and it doesn't make sense sometimes, because they're trying to make an effort, but like, and it's so hidden, like you have to look for it. It's not like they advertise it as much as it can. And also yes, they they overproduce their clothes a lot, and like, so let's say like H&M, they're talking sustainable fashion, but what's the point? Because they every single week they're making new fashion, new trends. So that's when the ethical part comes in.
Exactly. I agree with you, Malika. Okay, so I do have another question. Maybe Anthea can provide her input as well, because I know you talked about the textile industry and the history of our fabrics, and of course Malika has her present day and her work in sustainable fashion online. So I just is an open conversation, an open question. Do you think anything has changed since 10 years ago, or since fast fashion has become this like consumerist and capitalist ideology to where we are now. Has there been changes, and if so, have they been good changes?
I think there have been significant changes. I think that capitalism is a very powerful and fast-moving train, and it's going to take a while to shift it. But there have been a lot of ecological regulations in the European Union that changed what dyes could be manufactured, that changed what dyes could be used. That happened a long time ago now, like in the 90s. There was something called the German hit list, where they wouldn't allow these textiles to be imported into Europe that had been dyed with certain dyes. So all those dyes just stopped being manufactured. And that was just a blink. And I know, like the regulations, as like my example earlier, like if a regulation crops up somewhere, it has an effect around the whole supply chain. So it has an effect around the whole world. And those regulations, I've really only been watching the European Union, so I don't really know about the whole planet, but it influences the whole planet. So those regulations have been increasing and increasing. And awareness, like organic cotton didn't even used to exist. And awareness of even this conversation today, is a conversation that I think wouldn't have been held. There's still a lot more awareness needs to be spread, but there are conversations, there are resources that you can access to find out who's doing what. There is even a conversation about H&M and Zara having any kind of accountability, even a conversation that a consumer can get to that information. Like when Greenpeace did that first study in 2000, you couldn't get any of that information. So you didn't even have the power to make a choice because you couldn't get at the information. So I think that all of these things are very powerful and very hopeful. And we do know that ecological focus can help. The Thames River in the 60s was declared dead, and it's not dead at the moment. So there is the possibility of repair.
Very true. I love that. That was really insightful. So I'm looking at the time. We have 20 minutes left. I'm sure there's so many other things to touch on. And like I said at the beginning, this is a conversation that we can begin here, but continue to have after this this episode or this podcast. So I'm gonna just see if there's any other questions that people have that they're just curious about, maybe learning more about both yourself, Anthea, and Malika. And if not, then I guess we can wrap it up a little bit. I did have another question, but I think it may be a bit too long, and I don't want to, have it's for here. It's 9:11 p.m. and where I am right now in Canada, so I don't want to go on for too long. But if anyone has any other comments or questions, please feel free to leave them right now. Let's see. Okay, you know what? I'm gonna ask one more question. It's from Harveen, and she would like to know both either your thoughts on the aspect of the fashion industry and animal products. So leather, fur, wool, and how that is connected to animal agriculture. And of course that it emits carbon. And yeah, so if either of you are able to answer that or have any thoughts on that, let me know. Feel free to just chat.
I can go first, but I bet you have some good thoughts too, Malika. So I'll just say briefly, I think that wool is actually quite a sustainable fiber. I think that it's been analyzed and acknowledged as sustainable, quite ecological in a lot of different ways, because you don't need pesticides and herbicides, and wool is, you don't need as much. Processing wool, the dyes are very efficient. You have less dye runoff when you're dyeing wool, and you don't need as many chemical treatments to give it a sheen. For instance, polished wool is polished by having it be run over top of a piece of hard wood. Wool loves wood. You polish wool by running it over wood. So there's less chemical involvement in wool. So I think wool is a really good fiber. I think that leather, I am a supporter of leather as a byproduct of the food industry. I feel that the human beings still eat meat, and using the skins for leather is better than throwing them away or trying to compost them or trying to put them through a garbage system. So that's my feeling about leather.
So in terms of, and I agree with you, Anthea, about the rule. So one thing I did learn the other day and I was kind of shocked because I've grown up seeing I've seen my mom wearing cashmere. That cashmere is actually not sustainable as we think. It's because I think it's mostly because now these days cashmere is so readily available, and now it's cheaply made. So another sustainable, more like animal product I came across, alpaca wool, and I was shook because I never thought about it, but it is genuinely the most sustainable, and I feel and it's really soft. Like, it will genuinely keep you warm, and you don't have to feel bad about it because the process of it, it's not there because alpacas shed a lot in general. So rather than showing that whatever they're shedding, it's good that they're using that into making, sweaters or more of that. So I feel alpaca wool is something I've learned that's more sustainable in terms of animal product.
Cool. I'm just writing a little note in the chat about a rare fiber called kiviot, Canada's own fiber that comes from the muskox, and that would be a bit like the alpaca because the muskox sheds this underhair every year, and the Inuit up in the north used to have I guess they didn't have wood, they didn't have very much wood, but they would put spiky things out so that the muskox would come and rub their backs because they were getting all itchy because they were trying to shed the hairs, and they would rub against these sharp things, and then the Inuit would go and gather the muskox fur. And now there's wild muskox that are sort of semi-tame, and they pull it away, and the kiviot is warmer even than cashmere, and probably similar to alpaca in that way. But of course, it's a tiny, tiny market. It can't go replacing all the cheap cashmere that we consume all over the world.
That's so
If
cool.
there were kiviot sweaters, Peter, they would be very expensive. I bet you can order them. I think you can order socks and mittens.
That is so cool. This is like new information to me. I'm not too versed in I guess like animal fur and production, but thank you both for providing your insight on that. So it looks like that is all we have for tonight. It definitely has been a fruitful conversation. And although, we talked about many different elements and intersections of the fashion industry, I actually will leave one resource here for any of you who are interested in learning about the ethics for garment workers at Remake. They do amazing work focusing on turning fashion for a force of good, and right now they have a campaign called No New Clothes. Maybe that's something of interest to those of you who want to kind of reevaluate your relationship with clothing. So yes, and Fashion Takes Action. Please feel free to put that in the chat, Malika. Amazing organization as well, and they're Canadian based. So so I hope this conversation was informative for you all. I know that it can be very overwhelming, like I said, and I guess that's okay. And because these conversations, they start here for some of us, or they continue for some of us, and then it continues beyond this space. And so I hope that this is something that you can continue to think of and reflect and be more critical of in your life. So I also want to take this time to thank Peter from CCRC, who organize this amazing live podcast, and for giving myself and Anthea and Malika this space to talk about important issues and causes in specific the fashion industry. So I think it was amazing hearing both Malika and Anthea's stories. And Peter is leaving. He's saying, so on June 27th, please come back for another episode of Viewpoints, which will be focused on Indigenous perspectives on the climate, which I'm very much looking forward to. So thank you both, Anthea and Malika, for providing your time, your energy, your knowledge, and of course, your viewpoints on fashion and its impact on the environment. So thank you, everyone, and have a good night.
Thank you,
so much, everyone.
Thank you, Yuda.
Bye.
Thanks so much for tuning in. We'd like to invite you back for future episodes. Next up will be Indigenous Perspectives on the Climate Crisis, and that is on Thursday, June 27th. We invite your comments, questions, and feedback sent to info@ruralcreativity.ca. Stay safe, be kind to each other and to the earth, and we look forward to connecting with you again soon.